Hello and welcome to Movers and Shakers. I'm Ken Miller. Today I'm joined by 40th District State Representative David French. David, first of all, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you, Ken.
We're recording this in early January, just before the session gets started. David and I are socially distanced. We are 6 feet apart, and in the interest of being able to hear the audio for this interview a little bit better, he and I have agreed that we're going to remove our masks, so we're going to go ahead and do that at this time, and then we'll get started. So as I mentioned, the 2021 legislative session, Kansas legislative session, I believe that gets underway January 11th, David, is that correct?
Next Monday, yes.
Next Monday. So we're recording this about 6 days in advance of that. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that one of the biggest issues that you're going to face this year is COVID-19 and things related to that. So let's start with that. And I know you forwarded to me an email, I think from the House Speaker's office the other day, talking about all the precautions that you guys have to go through. Goes beyond masks and whatnot. Talk a little bit about what you're facing as you go to Topeka this year related to COVID-19.
Yeah, the leadership just sent us the new protocols for how the legislature will work this year. It includes a lot of restrictions based upon the COVID-19 guidelines. Mm-hmm. And so, for one thing, we will not all be on the chamber floor at any one time. They're going to have to social distance us, so that means there'll be a lot of the representatives having to set up in the galleries and alongside the walls, which is going to be very inconvenient, but of course that way we're all social distancing, so that's the good thing. The bad thing is that we'll probably end up having to do a lot of the actual work from our offices. We'll be watching it from online, mm-hmm. and we'll only go on the floor to actually make final votes. Also, all the committee rooms have been restructured, where we used to have half the rooms were for the committee and the other half was for visitors and those that were going to testify. All the committee rooms are now going to be just for the committee. They've expanded the workspace, and so those will only be on video also. Everything in the Capitol is going to be on video. They just spent $2.3 million, I believe, upgrading the video system so that all legislative meetings, actions will be observable by the public. All you got to do is go on the Kansas legislature website, and you can get on and watch any committee meeting or anything going on in the chamber. So those are the big things. We will be required to wear masks when we're not 6 feet apart. There will be no visitors to the state capitol until we decide that it's safer for visitors to be in the area. Only people allowed in the capitol will be the actual people working there, or those with legitimate business at the Capitol at the time.
So I know we've come and visited you a couple of times,
yep.
Tim Vandal, our city administrator, and I. So at this point, we would not be able to come and visit you quite yet.
The offices, the actual office, our offices are going to be closed to visitors. They just don't want people from outside coming in and exposing the legislators to
sure.
any kind of a problem. So,
sure.
Unfortunately, no. Yeah, you probably can't until later in the spring, maybe.
Okay. All right. And COVID's obviously the biggest issue, but there are other issues that you're going to face this year. And we've spoken a little bit about this before, David. I think the last interview we did during the last session let you know that KDOT had provided Lansing with a $1.68 million grant, actually Lansing and Leavenworth, and it's to redo that Eisenhower and K7 intersection there. Turn lanes are going to be done, I think, this year, coming up this summer. Additional focus now, obviously, on local transportation improvements to help spur economic development. What do you see coming from KDOT and other entities as we try to get the state and local economies moving? Do you see that as a big key to moving us forward and trying to get out of this pandemic economic downturn?
Absolutely. With the economic struggles that we're having in the state right now, and trying to keep the economy going, the infrastructure is the key to keeping the economy moving. And the grant that we got for the intersection down there at Eisenhower and 7th and 7th Highway is critical. It's probably the most busy intersection in the city for sure, and probably even the county. So it's going to be badly needed, and it's going to help transit through the Leavenworth-Lansing area a lot easier. So glad to see that happening. Last 2 years, the legislature, myself included, have voted to put money back into KDOT. I don't know if you remember, but 2017, 2018, KDOT was the bill payer for balancing the budget. It took a bunch of money out of KDOT to do that, and the infrastructure, of course, suffered because of it. Because of the deficits we've had from the economy shut down this past year, I don't see KDOT, us being able to give KDOT money back this year. I'm just hoping we don't have to use them for a bill payer again. So my intention is to continue to support whatever funding we can for KDOT, and hopefully we don't have to go in. And we do need the infrastructure. It's been suffering for several years. We need to keep trying to get back and improve, especially in this area, the Lansing, Leavenworth. We know we're kind of isolated from the metropolitan area, and our transportation needs are many, and we really do need to have KDOT helping us solve those.
Okay, all right. And it may not seem related, but in a way it is. My next question has to do with a lot of state legislatures have adopted rules, and this is mainly on the West Coast and the East Coast, I believe, so far. New rules regarding sports gambling happened in the past 2 years. What do you see on the horizon for Kansas? And maybe not so much on the surface, it's easy to say sports gambling, it's fun, guys like to do it and all that. But more from a revenue enhancement. You just mentioned yourself, you're hoping that KDOT doesn't become the bank of the state again.
Right.
One way to hopefully offset something like that is to find new revenue sources. You've been a champion, as have many of the people that I've spoken to. Property taxes, that's not the way we want to do it. Sales taxes, if at all possible, that's not the way you want to do it. What do you think, though, about sports gambling as a potential revenue enhancer?
It is I know a major issue, a major want up in our area with the woodlands. I know everybody wants to get the woodlands back going again, generate more revenue outside the area coming in here. So there's no doubt it is high on the agenda for this area. I don't see the same interest in the rest of the state for it. But like you just said, we're going to be looking for other revenue streams to try to help the budget for the next couple of years. And I would not oppose sports gambling. I think if we do that, we're going to have to make sure it's well restricted, because as you know, anytime you have gambling coming in, it brings a lot of other negative side effects. And a lot of times the extra revenue you get doesn't compensate for those extra negatives that come about and you're having to pay for. So we have to look at it. Again, I wouldn't oppose it if it comes up for a vote. I just don't see it. It's always been right below the radar screen the last couple of years. And unless we get some major push from our area, I don't see it actually coming up for a vote.
Really? Okay.
For the next couple of years.
Is the devil in the details as far as how much would the state's cut be? Do you see that as being a major point?
I see that probably being a lot of it, plus the fact we just need to know what the second and third effects of doing such a thing would be. We've already got the casinos in. I think that's more than enough space for people to do their gambling, to go in and spend their extra money. Sports brings in a lot of other type of problems with maintaining the animals and that sort of thing. So we just have to look at all the effects of doing that. Again, I would not, on the surface, oppose it, but I'm not actually in the process of supporting it right now either.
But as you said earlier, you think it may not even come up for a vote. It may not even get out of committee.
It has, like I said, it's been right under the radar for the last 2 years. People have talked about it, but it just doesn't seem to have the interest across the state to generate a vote. And we'd have to make sure we had the votes before we brought it up. We wouldn't want it to be defeated. we will make sure it did have votes to actually get it passed. And I would expect if we could get those votes, then it would pass, and then we just have to figure out how we're going to do it.
Okay, all right. Give us your perspective on where we stand now regarding potential Medicaid expansion. I've heard both sides. It may come up, it may not come up. Where do we stand now?
It will come up. It's still the number one priority for the governor. It's been priority number one for her since she was elected 2 years ago, and she hasn't come off of that. It will be introduced this year, I'm sure, by one of the Democrats in the House. I don't know if it'll even get out of committee this year. That's how the change in the legislature this year is significant. We have a much more conservative legislature. The Republicans in the House went from a supermajority of 84, which is basically what it was. We just had we had to vote as a block, or we didn't have a supermajority, till now we have 86 Republicans in the House. So I think that we'll be able to, I don't think it'll come up for a vote. I don't think it'll get out of committee. If it does come up for a vote, then it will not come up for a vote. I don't see the leadership bringing it up for a vote, because they're against it. And we could spend all afternoon if you wanted to talk about the pros and cons of it. But the bottom line is the state, especially now after the COVID budget deficits, we can't afford it. We couldn't afford it 2 years ago, and we can't afford it today. So I don't see it even coming up for a vote. The Democrats and the governor 2 years ago tried to, well, they did a cut and go of another bill inserting the Medicaid expansion into it. It had enough of the Republican moderates to actually pass it out of the House. It just never got out of the Senate. But again, a lot of those moderate Republicans are no longer there. So I just don't see that coalition coming together again.
You get revenue estimates every month. I believe legislative staff provides you with that. What's the picture look like right now? Because on the one hand, you're hearing about COVID-related downturn on revenue and whatnot. And then on the other hand, you're hearing, well, maybe it's not as bad as we anticipated back in March and April. But from what you're hearing, and again, we're talking in early January, this picture is going to change in early February and early March again. What are you hearing, though, about the state's revenue picture?
Well, look, we are bringing in additional money than we did last year. The governor just said it was like $13 million more than we did last year. That sounds good, except for the fact we have a $9 billion budget, and $13 million is not going to help the fact that not only did we close down the economy for 2 or 3 months back in the spring of last year, we still have elements of that shutdown still going on today that are affecting small businesses. You look around our area, we've had so many small businesses go out of business in the last year, and we have others that are just barely hanging on. So it's not over. We still have some major problems with the budget, in spite of the fact that we are making more money than we did last year. From a state standpoint, the situation isn't going to improve.
We're really, if you think about the way every year goes, and that's taxes are due on April 15th, we're really not going to know the complete picture till after April 15th in terms of tax revenue collection, correct?
The final,
right.
The final figures won't happen until April. You're right. So we got kind of a feeling now that things we're still getting money from that tax increase. So even though the Kansas taxpayer has suffered tremendously this year, a lot of people out of work and all of that, that tax increase from 2017 is still bringing in all this extra money from the taxpayer, which helps the state, but it doesn't help the taxpayer.
Lastly, and this is where I know you've started the work for this session, even though technically you're not starting until January 11th in Topeka.
Right.
But, we've covered a couple of the main issues, but maybe there are some issues that are flying under the radar right now that you can see already are going to be more of a big deal as we get into the spring. let us know, what are some of the issues you're hearing about that maybe we're not hearing about yet?
I haven't heard a lot of what's going to be happening other than the big issues, the major issues that I know that are on the schedule. Leadership is definitely going to be pushing the value them both amendment again. We didn't get it last year because we couldn't get our supermajority to do the resolution for the amendment. So that's going to be pushed again. We think that's going to pass, probably be introduced next week and passed within the following week. So that's a pretty good thing right up front. We've got to do something about the Emergency Management Act. The current law is very helpful for a governor in a short period of time, like for a tornado or for floods, to do the things that need to be done immediately without having to go through the procedure of going through the legislature. That has proven not to be effective in a long-term emergency like the COVID. It's gone on now for 10 months, and the governor has had the power that she's been given by these emergency declarations have given her a chance to, I believe, exceed her actual authority. And so we're going to have to go back and look at, okay, maybe the act needs to be refined somewhat for long-term emergencies like a pandemic or something like that. So we just want to make sure that this governor or any future governor doesn't use these powers in a negative way, just to accomplish what needs to be done during an emergency. So that's going to have to be looked at. We already have a committee that's been working on that over the summer. So we should get a readout from them of what they suggest we do to change that act. And I think that will be done fairly soon in this session also. And then the third thing that we're going to really have to be worked on is coming up with a balanced budget. Again, that's our only constitutional requirement for the legislature, and it's going to be very difficult this year, without a doubt, to do that. Again, I believe we're going to have to find some bill payers again to find a way to balance that budget. And I don't believe shouldn't fall on the Kansas taxpayer to do it. I think it's going to come from government reducing their expenditures. And that's going to be tough because there's just not a lot of fat in the budget. There's the discretionary funding is very limited. Less than 10% of the budget's discretionary. So,
are you concerned about a threat to capers?
I'm very concerned about capers. I'm very concerned about education. I'm just concerned about a lot of things. I don't know where the cuts can come. The governor will be submitting a budget to us, her suggested budget, probably within the first couple of weeks of the session. And at that point in time, we'll know how she thinks we need to balance the budget. And then we'll have to decide from that what we think we need to do. So I think that's going to be the big thing on this year, is trying to balance that budget. Now, if you let me talk a couple of things about some things that are going on that probably people aren't aware of, but that do concern our area. One of the things that is being done, we now have our 4 county state representatives are pushing a bill this year to set up a Kansas State Soldiers Home up here in the northwest part of the state. Right now we have 2. One's out in Dodge City, one's down in Winstead, I think it is, or Newton, I can't remember which. But you know, we have a major veteran population in this area, and it's not being serviced by the state. Now we have the VA, but it's not being serviced by the state. And so we really believe there's a reason to put one up here. Hopefully it's in Leavenworth County, but people down in Johnson County want it down there too. But particularly we'd like it for it to be maybe at the VA. I just took a tour of the VA last month, and they have lots of space. They have a lot of empty buildings. And in fact, they've used a lot of their old dorms as commercial apartments, low-income apartments. So there's space and accommodations there. Makes sense to do one there.
Sounds like the infrastructure's already kind of in place there.
Right,
Right.
right. And they have a nice mental health center there, and you're right. The infrastructure's already there. Why not go ahead and put a state home there also? We are trying to get that bill passed this year. Even if we get it passed this year, it's a process. We're trying to get the funding from the state and the federal government will take years. So it won't happen this year. We'll may pass it this year, but it won't happen for probably 3-5 years, something like that. Probably should have been done a long time ago. But anyway, we're pushing that out of the House. The other thing that I am most concerned about, of course, you know, I'm on the Corrections and Juvenile Justice
Right.
Committee in the House. And it was a shock 2 years ago when I joined that committee, the crisis that we had in our corrections. It was terrible. We had hundreds of more prisoners than we had beds for. And so a lot of overcrowding, a lot of riots and that sort of thing in the prison. And you know, last year we sent 260 prisoners to Arizona
Right.
at a high expense to the state. And there's been a crisis in the corrections for years, and we're trying to address that now. We've got the new prison that just opened at Lansing first of last year, which was state-of-the-art prison, which has really helped our prison here, except right after it opened, then COVID hit, and guess what? Because of the new prison, the state sent all their COVID prisoners up here to Lansing. So we got all of the COVID.
Right.
So we're still got to find a way to reduce the prison population. We cannot build more prisons like we have at Lansing. It's just too expensive. So we can't do that. So we got to find a way to reduce the inmate count. We have a committee that's been going on now, a special committee that's been going on in the legislature for about 2 years now, that's looking at ways of reducing the prison population, not letting criminals out, but somehow identifying those criminals, those that have been in prison that may have another option besides sitting in their cell for 12 hours a day or whatever, actually having a chance to go out and resume a chance to live in society in a meaningful way. So they all don't need to be just thrown into a cell. Some of them need to be rehabilitated, and that's what we need to do with maybe additional programs, mental health centers, whatever. Find a way to get their problems taken care of so that they can go back in society without throwing them in jail. And there's always going to be that criminal element that we will want behind bars and we don't want in society. So they're looking at that. They're looking at sentencing guidelines. Maybe we're putting people in prison for too long for minor crimes. I know there's been some heavy sentences for drug-related crimes. I think some of those, from what I've seen, are excessive and could probably be reduced. We don't need to have somebody that was caught with a large amount of marijuana for themselves spending 10 years in jail. You know, that just doesn't make sense to me. So we're looking at that, the sentencing guidelines. We're looking at ways of trying to find other options to handle those that are convicted of crimes. And so I think we're getting better. I think we're almost there, but COVID has slowed this down a lot. Lansing has a very good programs. They actually allow the inmates to go out and work in the local community, learn a skill, earn a little extra money. Great way for them to get out of the unlawful life they had and into something productive when they get out. And so that has all been put on hold. They're not doing that right now. which is very frustrating for the inmates because they're used to being able to get out and do something and feel productive. And now they're just having to sit in their cells because of COVID.
Right, right.
So that's really where I'm focused, is on that soldiers' home. I'm on the Military and Veterans Affairs Committee also, so that's something I want to push. And then the corrections, we've got to correct that. I think, I do not want that to be a bill payer. We've kind of neglected the corrections and public safety side of the budget for too long. So I'm going to be pushing for, if we have to spend money, then I want it to be on public safety and taking care of our veterans. To me, that's my priority. So
You mentioned during the sentencing guidelines, you talked about marijuana sentencing, for instance. Senator David Haley seems to bring it up every session, but do you think there's a little more momentum again for something like medical marijuana becoming the law of the Kansas landscape, at least? Do you think that's a bill you'll face, or is it something that'll never get out of committee again?
that's a good question. I wish you hadn't asked it.
Yeah.
Because I think you know that I am not for marijuana.
Sure.
I'm definitely against it. From growing up in the 60s, I just don't believe in it. I'm not convinced yet that medical marijuana may not have some effect, some benefit, but I just don't want to open Pandora's box.
Sure.
That's my problem.
What kind of pressure is on you? And I think I would agree, a majority of legislators in Kansas right now, when you're seeing Oklahoma and Missouri pass it right on our borders.
And Colorado.
And Colorado's got recreational too, right?
I have several friends in Colorado that say that legalization there has been a disaster for the state. Absolutely disaster, and I'm afraid that's what would happen here too. So, you're right. I mean, they're all around us, so it's going to be hard to isolate ourselves from those other states. I don't know. I just don't believe it'd be worth the cost of trying to generate money from it. Even though they say it brings in lots of money, brings in lots of problems too. So I just can't go there.
Okay. All right. I've been speaking with 40th District State Representative David French. For Movers and Shakers, I'm Ken Miller.